UFC light heavyweight champion Jon Jones was arrested last week. 4 counts, but only 2 of significance. The first one being the negligent use of a firearm in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But the more important of the 2 was that he was arrested for aggravated DWI. What does aggravated mean in this case? Meaning you didn't really break the law by virtue of having too much high of a level of BAC, but that it was extraordinarily high. Now, Brian, there's a lot of reactions to this. His people have come out. No, excuse me. His people have not come out and given a formal statement. And the UFC has said they're looking into it. The arresting officer statement can be read, and there was body cam footage that came out. I watched maybe 2 minutes of it, Brian, and I couldn't take any more of it. And I have to tell you why, which is I feel for the guy, to be honest with you, man. I know that, look, I don't expect his rivals, whether they're in his division or it's Israel Adesanya, to necessarily say nice things, and they didn't. Dominic Reyes didn't say nice things, and Jan Blachowicz, and certainly Israel didn't. I don't know what you can really expect in those particular circumstances. But for the people who are neutral in this case, you don't know John, you don't know them, you're just observing from afar. I would count myself in that, maybe you as well, and the most of the fan base. Man, my conscience just won't let me make fun of him. If anything, it looks to me like, you ask yourself, if you're in your 20s and you're a young man and you're getting in trouble, it doesn't make it okay, but you can kind of understand it. If you're still doing that in your 30s, where you're mixing vehicles, drinking, and firearms in the middle of a pandemic, it's not merely a function of risk assessment being bad. It speaks to me to something perhaps deeper. Now, what that is, Brian, I'm not a doctor. I don't know. But it looks to me like somebody who is a kind of care provider in that way, or who has some expertise, needs to make an assessment, and something bigger has to happen here for him in terms of treatment, because this was hard to watch, dude. It was legitimately hard to watch. My heart goes out to him, to be honest. I can't take pleasure in other people's pain that way. I can't take pleasure in that man's suffering. I was really alarmed by it. What about you? Yeah,
you nailed it. And look, in the recent Jon Jones public regressions, whether it be the whole USADA era of questioning whether he was innocent or guilty, mixed with his brushes with the law, being stripped of the title so many times, you'd always had sort of a split 50-50 of people basically going, look, this reckless guy, he deserves it. When's he going to ever change? Mixed with, kind of feel bad for the guy. I think this development right now, seemingly when we're already past the idea of him having made a personal comeback. Oh, remember those years and those days when Jon was so reckless? Now he's put it together. Well, he hasn't. So I think now we're in the point where I really believe everyone's motive and response should be more of grace and worry and care. Not necessarily forgiveness, but just of he's showing you that he has legitimate problems here. Maybe even mental issues that need adjusting. I mean, Luke, I'm no different than a lot of people out there. I mean, I've had undiagnosed mental health issues in my late teens and early 20s that led to substance abuse. I look back on it now and sort of understand it a lot better. Didn't understand it then. And I certainly have a lot of sympathy for what's really going on, because at each step of the way for Jon Jones, there had never really been a full on, despite him apologizing, despite him always sort of being able to say the right thing in the right moment and lean on his faith and all that. If you pick deep interviews and conversations, he regularly would mention, oh, I still go out to clubs, I still drink, I still party, I just don't do this stuff. That was obviously giant red flags, but now you're in a scary territory where you're waiting for the real rock bottom. And Luke, everyone's different. Sometimes the real rock bottom is death. Or sometimes the real rock bottom is a public scare or an embarrassment. We're past scare and embarrassment, but we are entering into even more dangerous territory where you're more worried about his life by all means than any form of fight legacy. This statement has been uttered before, and I think it's still true. It's amazing that Jon Jones is equally the greatest fighter of all time and the greatest cautionary tale in UFC and MMA history at the same time, competing against each other. I mean, whether you thought Dom Reyes or Maheta Santos won or not, Jon Jones still held the title up at the end and was victorious against some of the best fighters in the world. He still got it inside that cage, but boy, does he not have it outside. And Luke, I'm really at that moment now where it's like, please, not only were we saying suspend all fights for the moment during Corona season, suspend all Jon Jones fights, and let's really, the people around him, the coaches, the family members, the UFC, just force him into a level of facing the truth of what's really bringing these experiences on in his life and why he can't sort of put those demons away and save his life first more than anything else. Because at this point, Luke, how could you have a bad thing to say? At this point, I care about the man. I want to see him okay and not making much worse headlines.
And there's good news here to an extent, which is that you and I grew up in the era of the Doc Goodens and the Darryl Strawberries. We know how far a famous, rich, celebrated athlete can fall if things aren't taken into consideration in terms of the full breadth of treatment. Now, those men had their own situations. I'm not saying Johnny's equivalent, but here's what I am saying, Brian. He still has his title, he's still winning, and he still has his money as far as we know, right? He's still been a strong key earner. Those things, the titles are not important, but in terms of even his wealth and being able to take care of his family and himself, he actually hasn't lost that yet. He still has it. There is still time to make sure we don't get to a point where the real big part of the tragedy, or even worse, his physical health and beyond that. I don't even want to talk about that. So what I'm saying is, to the extent, and some kind of intervention is possible, to the extent that some kind of lifeline or just come to Jesus moment, whatever you want to call and classify it as, you're actually operating from a point where he is still a talented professional who hasn't lost all his money. Dude, that's a big thing. That you don't often see that in a lot of cases. We've got one here. I don't know what kind of guidance the UFC is going to provide or should. I'm not saying the pandemic is good, but this is a time for him, I hope, to hit the reset button. And I'll say it one more time. Whoever is in a position to give him the help that he needs, please do it.
It nailed it. Can we have a 30-second convo spinning off of this, Luke, with no disrespect to the serious nature of it? Are you of the belief that Jon has left a certain amount on the table in his career because of this, because of the constant problems, or maybe a little bit more like some of those problems fueled some of his best performances? I always bring it back to Manny Pacquiao. Whether you believe there were performance-enhancing drugs in that or not, he went through that peak era of his career, stopping people left and right. And then when he turned his life around and cleaned up, it became more of a point fighter. How much do you think Jon Jones didn't show us over the length of his career when we're already calling him the damn GOAT?
I think you've seen a lot of what he has to offer, but my hunch, and it's just that, Brian, I don't really know. My hunch is that you've not seen his upper bound limit of ability. In fact, by the time in the last 5 years, when he really, last 2 or 3, when he's really kind of hunkered down and been in training, not taking time off between camps, that sort of a thing, you've seen, I think, his defensive fundamentals grow. But, he's 32 now, almost going to be 33 coming up. He's been fighting since he was basically 20, almost a teenager in terms of training and everything else. Like, his drop-off just naturally is going to happen a little bit sooner than people who got started a little bit later by virtue of the years, by virtue of the wear and tear. And those formative years, he spent a lot of time partying. I mean, some of the stories I've heard, I've never had corroborated. I can't repeat them. But if they're at all true, it's shocking what he's been able to do. So this is my point. It's like, for all of the bad things that have happened, for all the times there's been missteps, we've not reached, in terms of some of the things you could identify, a cataclysmic level of decline. Now is the time to get this right. Now is the time to sort these problems. And so I think he might be the greatest fighter, as you said. He might be the greatest of all time, but I still think he's left some stuff on the table. I hope that he still has more to give, because whatever he's going through now doesn't get in that way.
And I hope that Corona season, Luke, while we're all pressing pause on our lives, could help us, as I mentioned last week, bury the hatchet on everything. So we're going to get you to follow back Joanna on Instagram. Your choice, how many hands you want to use. We want to get you to interview Dana. And I want to get you in one of the, remember that weird thing you did with Brendan? It was like Java Bros or something. I need you and Jon Jones to sit down and talk and bury the hatchet and have a moment there, Luke.
Yeah, that, most of those are just simply not up to me.
That's like bringing Carol and Joe Exotic together, Luke.